So we're going to move on to student representative reports. Do we have some reports from our student reps? I don't have a kind of a curve to this now, so I think you guys are down there, but I can't see you.
Got you.
All right. Speak loudly.
Okay, so the first thing I want to report on is now that break is over, I want to start working on Project Bridges. And so I'm going to try to get in contact with all the schools just so that they're prepared and they know what's going to come up. I know obviously it's still a long time out. It doesn't happen until around May. But I kind of want to start that a little earlier. I want to try to get in contact with Kiara just to make sure that everything that she did last year, we incorporate that somehow and that I fully understand everything before I begin. And if you guys have any requests or recommendations for that process, please let me know. And I'm going to teach Isabel all the tricks of the trade so she knows for next year, you know. We had a senior class meeting today during our Husky Futures period, and during that, Dr. Hurst came and actually talked about the bond, and we all learned about voting and all that, and I think that really opened the eyes, at least the seniors, that they're able to participate in some of this and realize that we are going to become adults, so I think that was really helpful. The first and only Lady Husky wrestling match is tomorrow at 6. It is senior night, so I'm asking her, please be in attendance or at least try because it's the only one that they have. And otherwise, we're just really getting ready for finals at the high school and getting everything set up. Isabel.
I don't really have too much to report on. I just need to correct what I said last board meeting. It's kind of weird not seeing you guys, but it's okay. I said that our reader board was up, and I done goofed, and I messed up. We don't have a reader board up yet, but we did get a ATV, and it's just all of our announcements to like the students and stuff. So, yeah.
It was a reader board. It was just not an outdoor reader board.
It was just our reader board. It wasn't like the big reader board. Yeah. So
I was afraid you just totally made that whole story up, so I'm glad to hear you have it inside.
No, I just missed. Yeah, so that's all I have.
All right. Thank you both. So we'll move on to board member reports, and we have a few items here. The first one, Jen, I don't know if there's any new legislative information. We have something. All right.
Oh, shoot. Yes. Well, I wasn't prepared, sorry. Have to accept the password and log in and, oh, shoot. Oh, it's not on this one. It's on this one. Eventually, I'll get to the legislative report email. Here we go. Okay. On Tuesday the 9th at 3:30, the House Capital Budget Committee has scheduled both the capital budget and the associated bond bill for executive session. That's exciting. Well, it would be nice to have a capital budget. It's not a public meeting, though. The bills will be voted out of session, and then someone's comment to me was, with both the Senate and the House controlled by the Democrats, they could move the capital budget bill on a strict party line vote, but the bond bill must accompany the capital budget bill, as it deals with the bonding mechanism to pay for the capital budget. Passage of the bond bill requires a 60% approval rate in both chambers. They have not come to an agreement on the Hearst decision water rights issue, but there is a hearing on that tomorrow. But the opinion was that they're moving the capital budget bills so that when the Hearst decision comes to resolution, the capital budgets are just going to be great. Got that? Check. Now let's vote on this. So hopefully that will make it so that we know what our 15 million number truly is, or at least give us something better for the whole state and the district as well.
Great. Thank you, Jen. All right, so the next item, I had brought up at the last board meeting just a question regarding our agenda verbiage in board docs in comparison to our verbiage in GP8, and asked the board to look at that and see if there was a feeling that maybe we go with using just the verbiage in our policy or changing our policy to match the verbiage in our board docs, or maybe somewhere in between. And so I wanted to, hopefully you guys have made a got an opinion on that you'd like to share with me? It was just for consistency, because in the policy, it's the verbiage is different. The order is the same. So what do you think, Mike?
I like the way, what is being used right now?
So right now, board docs, some of the verbiage is the same, but not necessarily all of it, as far as in comparison to GP8.
I like what is on board docs.
Okay. So how about you, Jen?
I can't answer. I didn't really look that up well enough to give an opinion.
Okay. Ken?
So what's really the difference from what you're doing now and according to GP8? Because
So-
you look at it and it looks exactly like what we're
Yeah,
doing.
we're doing the same thing. This is strictly about the verbiage, the words that are used. So in GP8, let me bring up an example. I'm going to have to go back and forth on this, I think.
Section D.
Can you help me on that, Tony? Are you
monitoring
looking at it?
reports from superintendent and executive.
My memory is it has to do with section D where the monitoring report sections are. This is my memory of when that came up last time.
There you go. So, well, yeah, I think that was the big part. But it was really just whether or not we want to use the exact same verbiage. And we could do either one. We could do what Mike said, just go with what the board doc says and then make a recommendation to modify the policy, or follow the policy and change board docs. But I think we should be consistent, I think was my comment. Let's be consistent one way or the other.
My personal view would be that we follow our policy until the time the policy changes. So if a board member rewrites the policy to match these discrepancies, then that's fine. But until then, my feeling is the policy is already passed.
Okay?
I agree. We should be following policy. I would say if
Okay.
we need to change it, then we
And so we can all get what we want here. Mike, all you have to do is submit a policy recommended change with that, and then see what the board feels about that. So for the next board meeting, we'll just make sure that our verbiage matches the policy at that time. Okay, thank you for that input. Now, the next item, this was just kind of I said I was going to bring up the IPGA conference at the next board meeting, and then we'd kind of put that to bed for a little while. Has anyone looked at that and decided if that's something they'd like to attend?
I've looked at that, and I don't think that is really all that worthwhile at this point. I tried to look up student stuff to see if there was even anything there that applied to them, and I couldn't find anything that was worth it at this point, that really even applied to the students going also.
So I will say that this conference is strictly about learning policy governance, and so there won't be anything specifically for students other than they would get the benefit of seeing the whole purpose of how policy governance works. So there won't be like any breakout sessions for students, because school districts are just a small portion of who attends this.
Right, there was a conversation though about the way they had worded something in there, and I wondered if that meant could it somehow apply to them, but for me, I don't think that at this time this is worthwhile, or the students.
Okay.
For me.
Ken, did you give it any thought to it? Is that something you're interested in?
I would love to learn more about the policy governance a lot more, but unfortunately, this time is right in the middle of my vacation time and family reunion, so there's no way I could actually attend.
Tony, what are your thoughts for this year?
I think I said it at the last board meeting. I can't attend it this year.
That's right.
But I did find significant value in it last year, and I think I will attend again at some point in the future, but I can't this year.
Mike, what are your thoughts for this year? Okay. So I think it's safe to say that no one will be going to the IPGA conference. So Okay, this was a comment that was brought up. I think Tony brought this up to me. Just wanted to have a discussion about the July and December board meetings. So currently our calendar has one board meeting in July. It's the fourth Monday of July. We don't want to have one the first Monday of July. And then our second meeting in December has been a noon meeting. And so I'm just going to hand that off to Tony about what his feelings are going forward, what he'd like to see.
Yeah, really my comment, and it'd be something that I think maybe we'll discuss, that I'll bring up at the retreat when we develop our next calendar. The reason why, as far as I know as a board member, why we only have one meeting in July and the short meeting in December is because that's the way we've always done it since I've been on the board, because July is a vacation. But I want the board to consider that I believe July is an important planning time for school board, for us as a board at this point, and the way that the board's going with policy governance, and I want the board to consider just a fresh look of should we be meeting twice in July, and it'll be a good discussion, a good retreat discussion, I think. But I just want to get it out there ahead of time. It's just, for me, it's just one of those things. You know, if you ask me why we only meet once in July, I'd tell you I don't know. We've only met once in July before I was on the board, but I think there's plenty of board work to do. And for me as a board member, I don't like only meeting once in July because I feel like we end up behind as a board in what we want to get accomplished for the school year. I don't know what any other seasoned board members feel like, but I think it'd be a good discussion to be thinking about between now and whenever our retreat ends up being.
Okay. And how about the December?
The same thing. It just from my view, the reason why, I know the reason why we have that short board meeting in December is for payroll, but to me it doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, we can discuss it at the retreat. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to have a noon meeting anytime, just because it's difficult when those of us that work, it's difficult to just have a noon meeting just to have a noon meeting.
Okay. So it would just be important for you to remind me to add that to the agenda for our board retreat this year. So, but that's
we could talk
something
about
to
it sooner
about.
as a board. It just, I mean, I don't think we're talking about changing anything that's going to impact the next board meeting, and so.
Yeah, I think that we could wait for that. I don't see why we couldn't. And even if we decide to make a change to the calendar before July, we have the ability to do that. So, okay, thank you, Tony. The next one I have, SurveyMonkey results in Board Docs Library. And I'm going to have to remember.
It was a concern I had. I could help.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so that's Tony again.
My concern is that we use SurveyMonkey as a board to help us to come to a consensus. And my concern is by putting the SurveyMonkey results themselves in the library for the public, is there could be confusion with the public over the SurveyMonkey says this, but the board decided this policy was Y after we had a discussion. And so I just am not sure the real reason to even have the SurveyMonkeys in our library, because they're not something that I personally as a board member would ever reflect back upon, because I look at what we actually decided as a policy, not the survey itself. I don't know why they got in there. I don't think the board directed anyone to put them in there necessarily. I'd be interested in the rest of the board's thoughts on it.
So you're saying there could be one specific comment and out of compliance that the rest of the board didn't agree with, and the board in general agreed it was in compliance, but then the public could read someone marked out of compliance and put a comment there and maybe perceive that was a board decision or board feeling. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So what's the rest of the board feel?
Hear what the rest of the board thinks on that, but.
Okay. Ken, what are your feelings? Keep it in the library, or just keep it with the agenda?
Yeah, I agree with the analogy on that, but I also believe in open government too.
Yep.
And it's in the agenda, yes, but if the public wants to go and research it too, and know, it's still there for them easily to find if they want to look at those. Believe it or not, there is some people that actually do. I mean, the numbers ain't great, but you might get one or two. But it's easy access for them. That's just how I feel on it. You know, still open government. And when we do it, we do create a public record, and all those public records should be open for the public.
Yeah, so, and I think I agree with both myself. I agree we should absolutely always keep it in as an attachment to our board docs, but I do feel like in the library, they should be very specific to monitoring documents, monitoring reports, and superintendent evaluations. Final decisions by the board, I think, in the library, keep the individual attachments in the board docs agendas. That would be my feeling. So
it'd be just as simple as I just typed on the board doc search, I just typed in the word survey, and it pulls up every attachment that's in every meeting that has the word survey in it. So it wouldn't be difficult. The public would have to know how to click on the button that says search, I suppose. But
And it sounds like the consensus of the board is to go with Tony's recommendation. Am I on that? Okay. So we'll just be removing that section from library. Okay, we'll move on to then, along the line of SurveyMonkey, though, I wanted to ask the question. I know it was brought up a couple meetings ago, I think, that the potential of including our student reps in our SurveyMonkeys. And I think the talk was that they would be included in our GP and BSR SurveyMonkeys, not EL and Ns. That was my memory. Was that what you guys remember? Since EL and Ns are evaluative to the superintendent, GPs and BSRs are evaluative to us as a board. They could give their feedback on how they think we're doing as a board. Is that what we had talked about? We could include them in SurveyMonkeys, but essentially in the end, only we five as a board can make those kind of decisions that are evaluative in nature with the superintendent. Am I correct in that assumption? Okay.
I agree.
So what does the board feel about starting our next SurveyMonkeys, which I think will be tomorrow, right? That we include the student reps for any GPs and BSR policies so they can give their opinions. I'm getting a lot of nods.
I would.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I'd
So-
like to hear the opinion.
The student reps, I think they like that idea, so they could be a little more involved in it. They might need a little mentorship on filling out those first couple. So I know you guys can contact your mentor if you have some questions. Okay. We clear there? Okay, great. And now we'll move on to the discussion regarding the detail of board meeting minutes. So this
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
This will go back and probably go back a year, maybe two ago, because time flies. I think that I personally felt that our board meeting minutes should be more detailed. We didn't, this might have been before that, because we definitely weren't doing video, and we might not have even at the time been doing audio. And I felt like, this is the one piece of information where people can really read and see what our discussions were about. They need to be detailed. Now I feel like since we have video of our meetings, that maybe our board meeting minutes should be more general. This is just my personal opinion. Just saying there was a discussion on this topic, because what it does, for instance, sometimes I'll look at the meeting minutes and I'll say, well, it wasn't quite like that, maybe a little bit of a detail that needs to be changed, and so then I would have to have a conversation to make the change, whereas if we just keep it general, if someone says, I want to hear what that discussion was, they can always go to the video and listen to that specific discussion. That way, if there was maybe a mistake in the notes and we don't catch it, that the public doesn't say, well, that's what they decided, when that wasn't necessarily the decision. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So this was just my feeling. It would actually, I think, make Talia's job a little bit easier if she could be more general. And we still have the ability for community look to go right to the discussion itself.
My concern would be the ability to search later. It'd be my only concern. The more that's in the minutes, the easier it is for me as a board member and for the public to search for words and have it get you to the section you want to be. The smaller the meeting, I realize it's going to be all on the video, but there's no way to search the video to find what you were looking for. That's my only concern.
See what you're saying. I'm just trying to think of like an example of how a detail in a discussion would be searchable, that someone would search for rather than just the topic of the discussion itself.
Yeah, it depends on how vague you go. If you go too vague, then the problem is you're going to remember a certain thing that happened and be trying to search for that and try to remember, well, what was before and what was after and where was it.
Okay.
But
What do you
or I
think,
will
Ken?
Anyway. But I don't know, because it's been a long time since we've done it the other way, and so I haven't
Right.
had to search in a condensed meeting for. We didn't have search capacity last time we had that issue, so it was even more difficult. We had to go through each envelope
Right.
and open it up and look inside and see. It was much more difficult to find the past meetings before we went to board docs.
You're impossible.
There's a
How
lot
about
more
you, Ken?
going off of memory.
What do you think?
Believe it or not, before I took the spot, I went back to help prepare me and read the last year and a half of minutes. And some of them I felt weren't clear enough. It was hard to understand why you guys got to a certain decision. And that's why I like to see some of the details still stay in it. Because it is easier sometimes to go back if you have a particular date. Just go back and read the minutes. It takes just a couple minutes to pull it up, and you're done, instead of the video going back and trying to research all that and pull out the particular time and period in that. So.
Okay. Great. Thank you. What about you, Jen?
I don't know. Before I would have said, oh yeah, it doesn't need to be detailed, and now hearing these things, I'm not sure. So I don't know if I can see both perspectives.
All right. What about you, Mike? You might be the tiebreaker, or you might create the tie.
I would say less broad, more, I hate to say bulleted, just have them be bullets. But I happen to agree with you to where I don't believe the detail is going to be the determinant factor of how I got to the search or what I was searching for. If the topic is there, I think if it matters enough to whoever's researching it, they're going to take the time to find their answers.
Okay.
So I believe to simplify them, I don't know if that's the correct term or not. Not that we're looking to make Talia's life or job way more complicated, but I believe if we simplify them, I guess is my best description of what you're trying to say, I'd be for that.
So it sounds like kind of a 2 and 2, and maybe Jen, we need to.
Jen's going to have to
Wait on
think
it.
about it and decide.
You can
All right,
think about it if you
so
want.
I guess the thing that because there's times on the meeting minutes that if you got to it and you could figure out where, then you could go to the video and find the exact time, and then if you wanted to listen to the exact conversation and all of those things. So I think in that case I would go a little more simplified, because it gives you very specific references to the time in a video.
But I would just add to that not everyone has Facebook, and you just can't click and go to a video without a Facebook account.
We're going to now
not
have
quite
video
there yet.
when you click on that meeting, the video is going to be accessible from Board Docs.
So are we embedding it somewhere else, or is it going to a Facebook link?
Well, it wouldn't go to Facebook. It goes to a YouTube link. It'll go to YouTube.
If it goes, yeah, as long as somebody has the technology to get to it, then.
Yeah.
If it's a YouTube link, it's going to be a lot easier than a Facebook link.
If they have a browser, would you say that they have the ability to get to YouTube, a YouTube link, for sure?
I would think so.
Okay.
I'm not a technology expert by any means, but
So
it makes me feel better if it's going to YouTube. I didn't know it was.
then it sounds like that they're leaning toward simplifying, but let's try this for a little while, and we can always go back and say, this isn't working out very well, or we might get some input from the public as well. One thing I would say is that I would ask, Talia, do you change the times based on what reality happens, or do you keep it based on what we thought was going to be? Because sometimes people get an hour and a half behind. But in order to make that accurate, you would actually have to update your times based on what really happened. So every time I go to B, you'd look at the time and note that. C, you do the same thing. Okay. I think we'd have to in order. I think Jen made a really good point there, but it would have to be really what happened rather than our estimate. Okay. Great. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on now to discussion of redundant district operating policies, and this I'll go to Tony again.
Yeah, the discussion really comes around to EL 19. district operating policies are this, that we've delegated them to the superintendent, there's no question by policy. Where the question for me comes is most of the DOP 1000s are actually school board policies. They all have to do with the board. And so, and I'd be interested to hear Dr. Hirsch's perspective on it as well. I get conflicted in saying, okay, it's Chris's responsibility to figure out all these DOP 1000s that really direct the board and how the board operates. But then he also is not, I'm trying to think of a good way to say it, but he is not the boss of the board. The public is. And so I get conflicted into, should the board really be going through the DOP 1000 series and taking out the ones that no longer apply because they're covered under governance, or should we be allowing the superintendent to do that? And in some ways, you're empowering the superintendent above what's intended, from my mind. But plus, we've been governance for 3.5 years now, and I've brought this up multiple times, and all these DOP 1000s are still there, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, this has come up a couple times, and it may even come up when Jen and Ken, when you guys have come to some of our meetings when you were candidates. I don't know if you remember any discussions regarding the redundancy of GOP 1000s when compared to our GPs, really is what it's about, and even maybe the BSRs. So do you understand what Tony's getting at there? If our 1000 series, really, some of them say almost exactly what are said in our GPs, and it just seems redundant. And I think that this was brought up first year and a half, maybe probably 2 years ago, and so it hasn't been done yet, but.
So an example is the next item on there is the redistricting director operating policy that, from my view, the board decides if we're going to redistrict, not the superintendent, but we've delegated the policy to the superintendent. It doesn't necessarily make sense to me.
Really, I think when we delegated DOPs to superintendent policies, we should have at that time removed the 1000s and made them board policies. We didn't, so we have an opportunity to correct that now, is in my mind. How does the rest of the board feel about that?
So really,
I guess, do you feel there's a need for 1000 series policies?
My question really came down to, should we be taking the lead as a board and going through the 1000 series and making decisions, or do we want to delegate it like the policy says and have Chris tell us what we're supposed to be doing as a board?
I'm definitely against that part of it. That part, yes, I totally agree. I don't know about the other part. I can't answer that yet. But, right, we should be taking that responsibility ourselves as a board.
Our policies state that we are responsible for excellence in governance, right? What do you think, Ken?
I agree. The public vote us, and we are responsible to the voters, and I agree.
Okay, Mike? So, Tony, you had sent me kind of a list of ones that you thought really were just absolutely redundant with policies we already have. And what I want to delegate to you, could you meet with Chris about those that are absolute redundancies, and so that Chris can then take those out of his policies, if the board's okay with that? And then any other ones that you just feel we need to make policies for, then you could bring that to the board and say, okay, here's some that are there that aren't in our policies that maybe should be.
Sure, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. And so that kind of segues into the next one. When Tony had asked, he wanted to have a discussion regarding redistricting, there was no policy in our governance policies about redistricting. It's a district operating policy 1105, but it is it's a responsibility of ours as a board. And so I hopefully we'll never do this again, but I referenced a DP or DOP in our board discussions. And so that's why that's there. But Tony, you had something you want to talk about redistricting.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that. I don't know if Ken and Jen were coming to board meetings that early, but the board about this time last year talked about redistricting and pursuing the basically what the law says is that as a school district we have the ability to have up to 2 at-large directors. We have to have 3 district boundary directors. Right now we have 4 district boundary directors and 1 at-large. And as a board, that board at the time had talked extensively about asking the voters to approve going to 2 at-large positions and 3 in-district or boundary positions. At the time, because we knew there was 2 new board members coming on, after a lot of discussion, the board at the time decided to delay making any decisions until the new board got. This is by my memory anyway, and the other 3 board members that were there can respond if my memory is not correct. But
No, that's how I
my
remember.
memory is we decided we'd wait and have the discussion another day. But I still, as one board member, believe that it'd be better for our community to have more at-large positions versus less, because it gives more community members the opportunity to serve on the board if they want to. And I think it's something that we should pursue. My memory is that we have to pass a resolution, and then it goes to the bond, and it goes to the voter to approve in the fall. But and my memory is, as a board, we have to have the resolution done by June or something like that. But my intention was to start the discussion and get the current board's feelings on if they think that's a good idea to have 2 at-large positions instead of 1. And then I imagine the discussion from them would go to deciding which director position would be the best one to open up to at-large at this point when we redo the bound. Because obviously one director that's in a district would end up being at-large when we got done.
Does the board feel this will be another appropriate discussion for retreat, or would that be too long to wait?
Remind me when the retreat is?
Well, that was something we'll decide here soon,
Month-ish?
but typically it's in May.
Okay.
It'd be a pretty quick turnaround if you waited till then, because I believe, I don't know if anybody here actually knows the date, but I believe it's early June is when you have to have notified the county.
You might be right, but typically resolutions for a November election is in August, I thought. But June seems early, but maybe it's different for redistricting.
I think that maybe this resolution actually ends up being voted on at the earlier election, but I'm not.
Might be an August one, okay. Oh, especially if it affects the November election, right?
Because I'm just going back to last time we changed it. My memory was it was the earlier one is when we voted on it.
Yeah, my guess is that we probably could make the change at any potential election. We could have a special election for it, but to reduce cost to the district. And since this next year is a non-board member voting year, we might be able to do it in November. But if that's true, I mean, I would suggest this would be a good board retreat item as well to have this discussion. In the meantime, hopefully the board members ask their constituents, kind of get a feel for what they think would be a good idea. How does the board feel about that?
No, I agree. I agree on that.
And then if we could get some verification about if we did go to a vote with that in November, how soon would we need to get the resolution in to the county? And maybe we'll make our decision off that, whether or not we do it in the retreat or beforehand. Does that sound good? Okay. Okay, so I think that's it for director discussions, unless there's something that someone has thought of in today's meeting that wasn't brought up. All right, I'm 18 minutes late, so I'm moving now. So we'll move on to required approvals. I will accept a motion to approve.
I would like to pull something out of the required approvals.
Can I make a motion first, Jen?
Oh,
Maybe this
sorry.
will help you. I'd like to move to approve item C1, required approvals, with the removal of item C1-4 to be tabled to a future meeting.
So I have a motion on the table to approve item item C1 with the removal of item C1-4, with that item being tabled to next board meeting.
I would like to also remove C1-5 for a discussion.
Okay.
Can I do that without seconding?
Well,
Can we?
that's it.
Oh, and I would like to make an amendment.
Well, no, we don't have to do that yet. We haven't had a
Okay.
second yet. So, but I want
All
to
right.
make a reminder to the board that when you know you're going to pull something, the approval of agenda is the right time to do that. We'll let it go today, but typically in the agenda approval, that's because you're changing the agenda. But what we need to do is then, we have a motion on the table, and there has been discussion. Everyone has heard what Director Stevenson has requested, so is there a second to Tony's motion, or will it die for lack?
Jen, is it something, do you feel like we need to approve it separate, or do you just want to have discussion on that item before we vote?
I think we need to have some clarification before we vote it.
So would you be okay with leaving it in there, and then after you ask your question and we have discussion, the board can always vote against the consent agenda and re-vote?
And we could have a second
concern.
motion to address that issue.
Yes, I think that would be okay, what you
Rather than
said.
pull it out and then rediscuss it.
Right,
Well done, Tony.
okay.
So there is a motion on the table right now, as I mentioned. There's been some discussion. Based on that discussion, is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by, well, I'll say the motion's by Director Ashton, second by Director Garza. Now, there's some room for some more discussion, and I think that's where it would be appropriate for you to ask your question, Jen, for clarification.
On the school calendar B for 2018-2019, on the bottom, it says, let's see if I can find it now. Oh, no.
You get an error when I click on it?
All of us do. No?
Are we all
again.
getting errors when we click on that right now?
Yep. Okay, so I think I can just explain it without, on the bottom of the school calendar, it says that there is, all of the underlined things are late starts, but there's no underlined dates. So just to verify, we're not having late starts for 2018-2019?
Okay, so Talia has an answer for that, I think.
So when I talked to
Hey,
Colette
Talia.
Simpson, she actually said,
In the future, can you not tell it to ask us to vote till we actually vote? Because now my screen's locked up.
okay. So when I talked to Colette Simpson, she said that we still do not know what late starts, what late start dates we are going to be doing because they still need to figure out the PLC dates. They might be changing in the future. So that is something that the OEA and the PSC will be coming together and deciding what late starts.
When is that?
She did not
Planned.
clarify. She did not let me know when that was going to be. When that's going to be.
So do we have to approve this now then if it's going to be changing anyways?
So that's Sandra.
Just so I understand, we're talking about changing when the school start time for those days, not if there's going to be school or not those days, right? I don't know about PLC days. Is that going to take a complete school day, change a complete school day, or do they?
Sandra, I think, has the answer,
Sandra
she said.
maybe knows.
What was that question, Tony?
Well, the late start days, I have a good handle on. If the days we do or do not have late start, it's just, we're going to have school that day. It's just a matter of when it starts.
Correct,
So
yes.
for me, to approve the calendar, that doesn't change much. 'Cause
Right.
You're going to still have school that day. The PLC days I heard mentioned, I think that might actually change the school day around, right? Aren't the PLC days all day long?
No, I think
They're
that's
in the
late start.
morning.
That's the hour and a half
That's
late
the
start is
late
PLC, right?
start.
Right.
Okay, sorry.
So
If
are we
it's just
being asked as a
changing the
board
time-
to approve the calendar based on the days that children will be attending school and days off? And the details about early releases and late starts, that's what's still under negotiations? Is that what I understand?
Correct. Late starts, I think, for the most part.
So when we approve this, I think that's what Jen's asking, are we going to have to then approve it again based on the determinations of those PLC days?
I don't believe, I actually don't have an answer for that. I wasn't aware that the PLC times were not on here already. I think Pete might have an answer.
To me, it would make sense that you would not have to do that again because we're just approving the amount of school days during the school year and when they are. And it doesn't change the amount of school days.
Yeah, I think what's contributing to the confusion is that there was some legislation that came through that made reference to the number of PLC days that districts could access. And I believe our association is still unclear about how to move forward with that recommendation from the state as similar to the capital fund project and those kinds of things. There's just some muddy waters. I think what they're looking for is approval of a start date and an end date and what those vacations might look like in between for students and staff. And then the PLC times we could figure out moving forward.
Okay.
The previous legislative rep apparently was not aware of this PLC legislation, so I apologize. I don't remember reading about
I
that.
vaguely remember something about that at WASDA in
All right.
passing with somebody.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Jen?
Okay, so we're not going to have to reapprove because you're just going to add or not add
I
late
would-
starts or
I don't
something
believe
else.
I don't know if anyone can guarantee that,
Okay.
because it might be something we have to approve again. But I think sounds like what people want to know right now is, how do I plan my summer vacations? How can I plan my fall vacations next fall? And probably an hour and a half late start's not going to affect someone's plans for that kind of thing. Is
Okay,
that safe
right.
to say?
Yes, I would
Okay.
agree with that.
Okay, so any other discussion on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. I can't click to find the exact EL at the moment, but there's an EL that basically says that directs Dr. Hurst to make sure that the public is involved in every decision that affects them. And I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything referencing this.
And students?
That the public and the students were involved in this calendar, and I just wanted to make sure. I understand it, and I understand it's in our agreement with the OEA that they get to vote on A and B. I just wanted to be assured that the process of getting calendar A and calendar B included parent input and student input and stakeholder input.
Yes, and we have that EL before us whenever we're making those decisions for definitely big decisions that impact students and parents also. So we talk about that quite frequently.
So do you know specifically how the students were involved in this? Because I asked my daughter the other day, I said, so did you have was there any surveys or anything you got? And she said she wasn't aware of any, but I do understand she's 16, and there might have been some.
So these two survey options came from Colette Simpson. So her process that she used to gather the input on those two surveys, we'll have to gain some clarification on. The two surveys that we sent out to the associations were the two options that Colette brought forth to the district
Yeah, and
office.
my question is not the survey. It's that, from my understanding of our policy, is that we want to have the stakeholders, the students, involved in helping to create calendar A and B, not necessarily vote on A and B, which one they want, because that's by contract, that's what the OEA gets to choose, and we approve what they choose. But I would hope that those people had input on creating the options for A and B, if that makes sense. If Colette just created option A and B all by herself and then had the OEA vote on it, I'd have a board member have an issue with that.
Sure.
Because that's not the process that the board wants.
So as I'm hearing this, I honestly, I need either some clarification, or I have some concerns that the OEA president not only came up with the A and B options, but then those were the only two options that were presented to OEA for voting on. Am I hearing that correctly?
Correct. So OEA president brought the two calendars, and then we sent those two options out to OEA and PSC staff.
So with Tony, I think in the past it's been a much larger group that came up with the options, but the OEA got to determine of the two options which one they wanted. So interesting. I'm less
I'm
comfortable
more
with this now.
concerned about the process than the end.
My understanding of the process, which would be consistent with previous calendar approvals, is that Colette is the messenger as the association president, so she would present those options for the district to share with the board and to consider. But there's a group of folks involved in OEA leadership that represent the Teachers Association that would work on that project, much like a board committee. It would be an association committee that develops those calendars, considering the constraints that are required by the number of days per month and whatnot.
So Pete, do you know if the contract says that that the OEA will be part of not only forming a committee to determine the calendars, but also then approve, or is it just that the OEA will approve the two that the district with their committees will come up with? That part I don't know the answer to, so I'm curious.
It would probably take me 2 or 3 minutes here to look through that as the meeting continues, and if I'm able to find an answer, I could share it at that moment.
Okay. This is something that does not absolutely have to be approved tonight as well, if the board would rather table this to next board meeting.
But we have a motion, so we need to vote.
Yes, we do have to handle the motion, but before the motion, or before the vote, I wanted to let the board know that. So there's a motion on the table to approve this with only one item being removed. So any approval would approve the calendar as well. So with that, I'll take a vote. All in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Aye. So that motion does not carry. And so there's still agenda item C1, and I'll accept another motion if anyone's got one.
I move to approve item C1 with the removal of subsection C1-3. No, it's already gone now, sorry. It was C1-3 before, right? Or 4? 4 and 5. Okay, gotcha. With removal of C1-4 and C1-5, both to be tabled to the next meeting.
So there's been a motion by Director Ashton to approve item C1 with the removal of sub-items C1-4 and C1-5. Second by Director Mike Garza. Any discussion?
Do we have to put C1-4 at a public meeting, or can we discuss that privately and then vote at a public meeting? Or does that all have to be public?
If you have an executive session material, then you could ask that there be some executive session discussion, but the vote definitely has to be in public.
I get that it does have, right, I agree that the vote needs to be in public, but I don't know if that needs to be at an executive session or not. I don't know that part.
Are you talking about a discussion, Jen?
You probably need
Yes.
to get with the president later and tell him exactly what you're wanting to discuss, and maybe he could help you know if that's
Okay,
executive session
that's a great
material.
plan. I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion?
President Simmons, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Board Member Stevenson, prior to this meeting, asked me a question on C13. I provided her the answer, but I emailed a gentleman to follow up, and it turns out that I was incorrect. So I simply wanted to clarify that prior to the vote. I'm unclear if this is a good. I'm assuming this is a good time to do it, but I just
I think
before we
as good
vote
as any.
after.
So the question that Director Stevenson had was, prior to the meeting, was if for the bond council price, if it's on the entire bond amount, or if it's on the two resulting sales. I was under the impression it was under the entire bond amount. However, I emailed our counsel, and he stated that I was incorrect, that it is under the two amounts.
Well, that's
So-
very fortunate for them, isn't it? Because they get more money.
So I just wanted
That's a
to
great question that I
wanted
never
to
thought of. I
clarify
assumed
that.
it was for the total.
I wanted to clarify that prior to the vote. So he just emailed me.
And we can't negotiate that? That's
I'm
it.
under the impression that we cannot, but I
Okay.
am not a lawyer. I do not
Thank
know.
you for checking that.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what other options we have, so. Okay. So now we're ready to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Now we'll move on to superintendent comments. There's just one item in here. One item in this is the donation from Consolidated Disposal Services. There's an attachment that explained it in detail very well. If any board members have questions on that, we can ask. Otherwise, we will move on.
I did have a question. Were those accounts, the balances that were negative, was that district-wide or specific schools?
That was district-wide.
And that was as of the end of the year or the day of the donation?
That was as of the last day of the school year 2017.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right.
No questions, just appreciation.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the board has
That's amazing.
asked, is to always make sure we know about these donations so that we can be aware of them and share our appreciation, sometimes to individuals that we might see in the community. Okay. So we'll move on to item D1. I'm now 24 minutes behind. I have to work on this, apparently. I have a lot more faith that I'll be more efficient as a president than I am, I guess. So
I move to approve items D1, report, monitoring reports EL4 and EL5.
There's been a motion to
Acceptance.
approve or accept?
To accept.
Okay. There's a motion by Director Ashton to accept the two items under item D1, the EL4 and EL5 monitoring reports.
I'll second that.
And a second by Director Johnson. Any discussion?
Every meeting, just so I can make sure. We can accept those reports. That's where we do this now. But if we have questions, then that would come now. If we disagree, that would come in our Survey Monkey with details.
It'd come either in the Survey Monkey with details or in the next meeting when we monitor, when we find compliance or incompliance.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We'll move on to, these are the monitoring response documents prepared by the last, at the last board meeting. And before we vote on this, Dr. Hurst was not present at the last board meeting, as you know, so he had a couple questions or comments regarding our monitoring response documents. So,
Yes, just a question for Director Stevenson. I was not at the meeting, but I did have a chance to look at the Facebook Live. Excuse me. And we're very interested in reporting accurately as a district. I believe there was a comment or a question about the accuracy of information contained within an EL or a couple of ELs. So as I stated, we're just very interested as a district to make sure that we're doing accurate reporting or correcting as necessary. So just like to know if there's any information that we need to be aware of so we can make sure that we address or correct as needed.
I believe as I remember the discussion, and maybe I think you're referencing EL3, right?
Yes, sir.
Correct? Really the question came to the rapid responder had been out of compliance earlier in the year and then brought into compliance. Really the question and the discussion that came with the board just was that there is an EL that says that anytime a policy is out of compliance, it's your duty to let the board know it's out of compliance. And we felt that if it was out of compliance and brought back in, we weren't able to ask you if you found out the day you did the report that you were out of compliance 6 months ago. But it's almost a moot point because even if you didn't know, somebody should have known to inform you were out of compliance at that point, and the board should have got notified then. And that's really, I don't know if the way that comment's worded, it really summarizes that very well, but that's really what the discussion, as I remember it, was about. Was anytime a policy is out of compliance, it's your responsibility to let the board know, even though it's not the time that you monitor that policy, if that makes sense. I think that from my memory is the issue was resolved and it's fixed going forward, but it was out of compliance for a time during the year.
And then my other comment is, how would you like me to do that? Would you like me to come and talk to you if I know that there is something by direct inspection or experience that is not being done according to your report? Or would you like me to do it in a meeting? Which way should I do that?
So Jen, I want to answer that because
it's
it's policy. Regardless of what Dr. Hurst would like you to do, we need to follow policy as a board.
That's true.
And I'm not saying that to be smart.
You're right. You're right.
But
okay.
there is BSR. I thought about this as you had asked that, and Dr. Hurst had said to me, I'd really like to know what the issue was, and so I was wondering if is the appropriate way for Jen to go to me on that. But then I looked through policy. BSR 1, item 4 says members will refer to the superintendent regarding any compliments, complaints, or criticism about operational issues, so that issues and trends can be addressed and tracked. So it says members. To me, that means that a member can go directly to the superintendent for that.
Okay. So then you're telling me go to Chris with things that I had concerns on,
When you
correct?
When you have compliments, complaints, or criticisms about
Okay.
operational issues, yep, you
And
Okay.
then
policy
as a board-
allows you to go to
as a
the
board-
superintendent.
As a board, we need to not wait until the policies are coming up for compliance for that either.
As soon as you
Because
hear
there's
it.
no- There's no
Right.
reason to keep
Yeah.
it in your mind for 6 months. And I remember that I
No,
saw
I
this
think
6
it was
months
just
ago.
because I read this, I started paying attention and realized, oh, those things are not.
Yeah, and you've only been
Right.
on the board for 6 weeks. and so
That's
it's
true,
kinda hard
that
to
too, right. Okay,
say you
thank,
should have told him 6 months ago, but,
okay.
so you have a little bit more grace than some of the other
Thank
rest
you,
of us.
thank you.
Okay, so if there are no other questions or comments, I'll accept a motion to approve item D2, EL monitoring response documents. Been a motion by Director Garza to approve,
Second.
second by Director Johnson. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We'll move on to item D3. Those are the BSR monitoring response documents. These were all documents drafted up at the last board meeting based on our responses to SurveyMonkey on how we interact with the superintendent. Is there a motion to approve these monitoring response documents?
Move to approve item D3.
Been a motion by Director Ashton to approve item D3, BSR monitoring response documents. Second by Director Garza. Any discussion?
I'll have some discussion.
Okay.
Okay,
So Jen,
yes,
sorry to cut you off.
Please.
You can bring up discussion in an informal, it's not as formal of a Robert's Rules of Order in this setting. You can bring up discussion before a motion,
Okay.
after a first, or after a second, just so you know.
all right.
Sometimes you want to bring up discussion before because you think it might actually affect the motion, and that's okay, because it saves us some time from having to amend.
Take it
or-
out
yeah.
and okay. So on BSR 1, I think this was something that we need to either put at a later date or, BSR 1, yes. If we disagree as a board with the superintendent's interpretation, then what do we do with that monitoring document? What do we do then? That's what I'm trying to say.
You're referring specifically to the verbiage in BSR 1?
That's where I put it in my notes, but it doesn't look like that's where it's supposed to be. Now that I'm here. Definitely not here.
So,
It's probably in the policy itself, so we'd have to go to the policies.
That's where it is. I'm sorry.
But if you felt like that we were not compliant in that policy, then we should have discussed that at the last meeting.
okay, you're actually asking about superintendent interpretation, correct?
Yes.
So you're asking about BSR, hang on. I'm trying to figure out which BSR you're actually asking about.
Well,
I believe
It's three.
BSR 3
I think it's
subsection
actually
Three.
3.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so the appropriate time to ask about that would be when we evaluate ourselves through SurveyMonkey. But there's never a bad time to bring up that for clarification. But right now, we're just approving the documents that we,
Voted on last
yeah, we have a motion
time.
to approve the
All right.
documents, the monitoring response documents for the BSRs.
Okay.
So this discussion item, this isn't the right
This
place
needs,
for that.
right. We need to be in policy review for these discussions.
Yep, that policy review would be appropriate.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on then back to our motion and second to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So we'll now move on to item E1, policy review. I'm now only 20 minutes behind. I'm catching up. And now it's going to all go bad, isn't it? Okay, so Is there any, there have been no submitted requested revisions to EL2 or EL3, so if there's no motions to make any changes there, I'm going to move on.
I'm sorry, you're saying?
This would be to change the
E1 and
policy.
2, or just E2, E1?
EL2 and EL3. No one has submitted any recommendations for revisions of those policies, so I'm assuming there's no motion for.
I don't have any revisions to the policies, except for that I brought up before that we need to keep the formatting consistent, and they're not. And I thought we had corrected them, but the formatting at the top.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
And because EL 1.2 last reviewed should now say a different date. It says September 25th, but we're after tonight that date should change. So I just want to clarify that we're going to change the top of these so they're all consistent. And EL 1 doesn't have any of that stuff.
Yes. Have we been clear as a board what we want? I mean, right now, if you look at EL3, there are 8 lines before you even get into the policy. Have we been clear about what we do want in that?
I know we went through it as a board, and I understand what each one of those means now. For me as a board member, I don't know if the rest of the board remembers what they all mean, but
When you say 8 lines, you mean book, section, title, number,
Exactly,
adopted,
yeah.
last revised, last reviewed?
some
Yep.
of that has to do with board docs and how it, I believe, and how it puts it in there. But
Okay.
the bottom 3 lines of the top were the ones that meant tempting
Yeah.
to me. The adopted is the original date, last revised is the last time the policy was changed, and the last reviewed is the last time we reviewed the policy and determined compliant, or we went through this review process.
Right.
So the bottom one should change every time the policy is reviewed of those 3. And if we're not going to change it, then we should take it out, because I don't know that it's imperative that it be in there, but I don't like it when it's in there and it says we reviewed it in September when we're reviewing it in January.
Right. So what do you do, though, in the case where a board member says, I'd like to table policy review on that until next meeting? Would you just then change the date
It
from
doesn't technically
today's?
change until it's
It's actually approved.
been through
Or-
review.
But I think you
I don't
did
even know that needs
revise,
to be there, but
I think you did revise all of these in September because you added those lines.
those dates, they're right now, but what caught my mind is the other policy doesn't have any of that
Doesn't have
stuff.
the dates, right.
And I was just reminding
Okay.
Talia that if this goes by without a review the way it is, that September 25th date needs to change to tonight.
And
Or if
they're-
the board as a whole feels like we don't need to put in the last time it was reviewed, we could tell her to start taking them out. It's really not, to me, it's not a big deal one way or the other, as long as the dates are right.
Right.
I do want to know when we adopted it and when it was last revised, but the other date just tells us as a board that we actually reviewed it.
I agree. What's the board feeling on that line, last reviewed? Does that need to be in there? Or do we always just assume it gets reviewed according to calendar, which we can't always assume that?
Okay, so we have a calendar to review these, but sometimes because of a certain situation or something that happened, we need to remember, well, then why did we look at this again in September? If we're doing this again, oh, that's right, because there was a problem.
Good point.
And that brings that back up sometimes, and we need to have that.
Or a board member just wants to make a policy recommendation, policy change recommendation. It could be not according to the calendar.
Right.
Good point.
So I think all 3 of those are important.
Leave them. Okay, so we just want to make sure that when this goes back into monitoring or into the board policies, that it has those items in it, I think is what's being asked, correct?
Yeah, 1.1 needs to be updated. But it's not actually the policy itself, so it's just formatting.
Just adding reviewed and revised, yes. Okay. Now, so can we move on to BSR? Is everyone comfortable going to item E2? Okay, so this is specifically a request for any changes to these policies, recommended revisions. Are there any recommended revisions to these policies?
I do not have the exact wording, but we need to include something about under 3, when we review their performance. Wait.
Which 3, sorry? BSR
Okay.
3?
BSR, I'm in BSR 1, number 3. Oh, let's see. I disagree with the way that this is worded, because if we disagree with his interpretation of the ends or the limitations, then it's not identical. The performance is not identical.
So I think that this policy is just stating that any organizational accomplishment from a board perspective, that is, we are evaluating only the superintendent, and it's going to reflect positively or negatively on the superintendent. Is that correct?
That's the intent of that wording.
Yeah. So
Okay.
So if you believe the wording of that is not correct, then you would submit a recommended revision, and then they put a side-by-side, Talia would put a side-by-side comparison, and then the board would look at those changes and then we'd vote on whether or not we agree with the revision.
Okay, then, like was discussed at an earlier meeting, I need these like a week ago. I don't need these like Friday.
Well, you can pull them up anytime.
Yeah.
To look at them.
So whatever we do a Survey
After
Monkey
we-
on, the next
Okay.
board meeting, it'll be in policy review. So at any time
Okay.
before that, if you have recommended changes, feel free to make those. When I sent the text, I just reminded the board that if there's any policy review recommended changes come, that's when you would shoot them over to Talia.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I do, Jen, maybe that'll help you, is if I'm in a meeting and we're doing compliance and I feel like, hey, the policy's not written the way I like, I go and work on the policy the next day and get it all redone the way while it's fresh, and then I'll send it to the president then. You can send it, you don't have to wait till the Friday to send it to him either. That's just the last day that you can give it to him and still have it go to this policy time, this board meeting.
So does that need to be sent to me, or does the board feel that can be bypass me and go right to Talia or to Dr. Hurst?
My personal feeling is it should go to you, but it's whatever the board thinks.
I'd just straight to Talia if this is going to be on side-by-side. I mean, it's not like you're going to...
Yeah, I would expect Dr. Hurst to make me aware of it in our agenda meeting. But I'm not going to have an opinion about it till we are in the board meeting. As far as
I like to make extra work for you. I'm always going to send it to you.
Kind of got the sense. I wasn't going to say it.
The president needs to do something.
What do you think, Ken?
I think just send it straight to Talia.
Okay. Tony, you go ahead and send yours to mine, or to me, and I'll make sure it gets forwarded on to Talia.
Do all these have the same formatting? I'm just checking them one by one here.
I'm looking at BSR 1. It doesn't have last reviewed. It just has last revised after adopted.
Okay.
So we'll just make sure that that's also. Okay, so no recommended changes to those policies right now is what I see. So we're going to move on to item. There is no need for executive session, so on to item G1, upcoming events.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Is this the appropriate time to request a workshop as we talk about upcoming events?
I would say so.
Okay. I did pull the item, the awarding the lease. I would like to request that we have a workshop to not discuss approving the lease, but to discuss modifications and potential modifications to our property that need to be made, just so that as a board member I can understand better the different options. I'd like to ask that we as a board invite the irrigation district to come, whoever that we got bids from to put in pipes or not put in pipes to come, and have Brian there so that I just feel like as a board member I really need to understand the the ins and outs of how how that would work if we leased to one individual or the other. But I don't necessarily want to approve that lease that night. I just want to understand what all of our options are, because I'm not sure we've discussed them all yet.
Do we need to have those that gave us the quotes there as well?
From my perspective, we don't, but because we're just talking about how we prepare the ground for each leasing. I don't know that we need to have them there.
Okay.
I'd be okay with that, but I don't know what value it would be.
I think I understand your request. It's going to be up to the board whether or not they would like to have that meeting as well, the workshop. Ken, what are your feelings?
I definitely agree. I would like to be educated a little bit more to
Okay.
understand. I believe we should get the best value out of that land as possible, and if it takes us to make an investment into it too, possibly, I'd like to see that, to see if it would be feasible.
Okay, and I'm seeing a nod from you, Jen. Yes. All right, and Mike?
I don't know the main reason to have it is to make sure somebody, a representative of the irrigation district can be there, and at least one representative that gave us the quotes for the work. Because we just know the scope that's been told to us. I want to talk about all other areas and avenues and ways we could, we have to cover every option.
So then there's a consensus that we want
I
the
think it would be
workshop?
beneficial to have someone from FFA, because we had originally talked about having them farm it as well, or at least a portion of it, from our local, the high school students that we had talked about. Right. We need to have that person there as well.
The board agree with that? Okay. So what date would the board like to do this? We've got, I'll just mention the January 15th.
If those individuals can come and work on a holiday.
15th, we have a policy governance workshop from,
Before it or after it. Yeah, I like combining things together, not meeting twice.
we currently have a policy governance workshop from 12 to 2. On the 16th, we have a board and PTA dinner from 6 to 8 in the evening. And February 6th is our Ludacage Elementary School Board site visit. Those are all of our extra meetings outside of our normal meetings.
My personal preference would be to be the 15th or the 16th, either one. Not wait for February.
So if we did it the 15th, are you thinking like 11?
11 or 2.
Yeah, I'll be working on the 15th, so I got 12 to 2 is taking up my what I can devote during the day, but I have evening off.
I'm open all day.
Is the policy governance going to take 2 whole hours?
Well, it depends. Depends on, you're going to be basically getting an understanding of the interpretation of the policies. So it all depends on I guess, where you're at with your understanding of the interpretation. It's hard to predict that.
I'd also be okay, I guess, in line with what Ken's saying, of starting the workshop discussing the land lease, ending it with the policy governance training, and we'll end it too, and if we have to continue our governance training at another date, we can continue it.
Okay. How long do you think the land lease discussion you'd want for that?
An hour at the most.
Okay, so we 12 to 1, and then 1 to 2 for the other items. Okay, so I guess we're not changing our workshop. We're just changing the scope of the workshop.
Depending on people being available.
We may have to come up with a second option.
Under the assumption that those people will be available, which they may not be.
Yeah, well, ag director on a day that they don't have school would be difficult, I would think.
And the director of the irrigation district might be difficult as well. I don't know that they work that.
Yeah.
Well, we're never going to know until we try.
So do you want to come up with let's come up with a second option in case that one doesn't work.
What about before the PTA meeting? At 5?
Would work for me.
For an alternate?
What do you think, Mike? Ken? Okay. So do we like that as option 1 or option 2?
I think we need that as option 2.
Okay. So I will get together with Dr. Hurst to set that up. we'll make sure we get invites out to people, see if they're available. Okay? All right. So now, if there's no more events that anyone can think of that I've missed, then I'm trying to just do events this month and our upcoming month that are outside of our normal board meetings, our regular board meetings. So now we'll move on to our board self-assessment. Okay, looks like we have 6 answers. So who does this one, the self-assessment? Right now it's just board members, right? We've always done it.
I think what happened was that I accidentally clicked back and clicked submit again somehow. They shouldn't have accepted my answer twice, but
Okay.
it
Well.
doesn't help your story.
Well, thank you, Tony. All right, so the first item, the agenda was well planned to focus on the real work of the board. Average of 4.5 on that. The board followed its agenda and did not get sidetracked, 4.33. The board's deliberations and decision-making process were public, 4.83. Nice job, board. Participation was balanced. All participated. No one dominated, 4.0. Members listened attentively, avoiding side conversations, 4.67 average. Board actions occurred at policy level rather than operational level. All said yes. The board reviews policy about each topic before discussing that issue. Looks like all said yes. In writing additional policies, the board starts with a broad statement and becomes more detailed and in a logical and disciplined sequence. Good job. Everyone realized that was not the case tonight. No, we did not write any additional policies. The board chair helps the board efficiently conduct its meeting. All said yes, and the board supports the superintendent in any reasonable interpretation of its policies. We did not evaluate the superintendent through monitoring today, but everyone felt that was true.
I believe the student reps could do these, right?
That's what I was asking. I was thinking that would be something that's
Caden and I were discussing. We decided my extra click was actually her, so then now we're good.
So and basically this doesn't limit it, so anyone who clicks in can answer, right? All right. I don't want people getting carried away on this. We could have like community members that are starting to evaluate us, right? It is a board self-evaluation. Remember that. Okay, so the average 4.67, and we're done with that. And now we will move on to item G3. I'll accept a motion to adjourn. Motion by Director Garza, second by Director Stevenson. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Meeting